Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Vocational Education and Training, SOVET, Master's Degree Programs, Master of Arts, Entrepreneurship, MER, Semester 3, MER 009 Marketing Management, Block-1 Nature and Scope of Marketing, Unit-4 Qualitative Research, Analysis Techniques, 4.1 Introduction. As you know, events concerning education phenomena are very complex in nature. They involve mostly sociological and behavioral manifestations of human relations in specific contexts. The methods adopted to explore the meaning and processes of educational phenomena are basically qualitative in nature. Most of the information in education is in the form of verbal and other symbolic behavior. The verbal data, gathered through questionnaires, observation, or interview, are mostly qualitative in nature. These data provide depth and detail which emerge through direct quotation and careful description of phenomena. Unlike scientific explanations to educational phenomena, qualitative research concentrates on understanding the process of dynamic situations and intervenes with the reality in its natural setting. The procedures adopted are of humanistic nature. Of late, major attention has been paid by educational researchers to qualitative methods, having their origin in the typical nature of inquiries in sociology, anthropology, political science, and psychology. Qualitative methods have been given refined shape through current literature. In this unit, you will be exposed to the nature of qualitative research, its types, context, and steps involved in conducting qualitative research. Analysis and interpretation of data is the most crucial phase in social science research, but the challenge faced by the social science researcher is to make sense of a massive amount of data, reduce the volume of information, identify significant patterns, and construct a framework for communicating the essence of what the data reveal. In case of qualitative data, few agreed on canons for these data analysis. In the sense of shared ground rules for drawing conclusions and verifying their sturdiness, Miles and Huberman, 1984. There are no formulae for determining significance. There are no ways of perfectly replicating the researcher's analytical thought processes. There are no straightforward tests for reliability and validity. In short, there are no absolute rules except to do the very best with our full intellect to fairly represent the data and communicate what the data reveals. Given the purpose of the study, this does not mean that there are no guidelines to assist in analyzing qualitative data. But guidelines and procedural suggestions are not rules. Applying guidelines requires judgment and creativity. Because each qualitative study is unique, the analytical approach used will be unique. Because qualitative inquiry depends at every stage on the skills, training, insights, and capabilities of the researcher, qualitative analysis ultimately depends on the analytical intellect and style of the analyst. The human factor is both the great strength and the fundamental weakness of qualitative inquiry and analysis. In this unit, you will be provided with the knowledge of nature of qualitative data, sources of qualitative data collection, how to decide data analysis strategies, and components of qualitative data analysis. The analysis of qualitative data is best described as a progression, not a stages, and ongoing process, not a one-time event. Marshall and Rossman, 1989, explain. Data analysis is the process of bringing order, structure, and meaning to the mass of collected data. It is a messy, ambiguous, time-consuming, creative and fascinating process. It does not proceed in a linear fashion. It is not neat. Qualitative data analysis is a search for general statements about relationship among categories of data. It builds grounded theory. The interaction between data collection and analysis is one of the major features that distinguish qualitative research from traditional research. The research collects the first available data from the field and immediately forms very tentative weakening hypotheses that cause adjustments in interview questions, observational strategies, and other data collection procedures. New data, obtained through refined proceeding, test and reshape the tentative hypotheses that have been formed and the data collection procedures. This interactive refining process never realizes until the final report has been written. This whole process is facilitated through the decision about data analysis strategies that have been decided early and the concurrent activities, viz. Data reduction, data display, conclusion drawing and verification help the researcher finally analyze and interpret the data. However, before the so-called final, term given by Glaser and Strauss. 1967, analysis is attempted by the analyst. The following activities have to be carried out which are mandatory in nature. The activities are I. Organization of data and 2. Familiarizing oneself with the data. Organization of data. The qualitative data gathered through open-ended questionnaires, in-depth interviews, and participant observations are voluminous. Sitting down to make sense out of those pages and field notes seems pretty difficult. Therefore, before you actually begin the formal analysis, it is important to clean up and organize as you go along. It saves time, creates a more complete record, and stimulates analytical thinking. The first thing to do is to make sure it's all there. Are the field notes ready? Be sure that you know where and when you took the field notes, who was there, and what the event was all about. Check to be sure that interview transcriptions are dated and who it was whom you interviewed. Also be sure that you have written down hunches and analytic ideas throughout the study. This shapes and refines your thinking and provides insights for analysis. Once the researcher is certain that all data are there, she has checked out the quality of the data and has filled in any missing gaps, formal analysis can begin. It may be noted here that since data are unique and priceless and it is not possible to obtain the same conversational or observational notes once again. For safety purpose it would be desirable to make at least a few copies. Once copies of the data have been made, the formal analysis can begin. Since analysis of qualitative data is a creative process, there is no right way to go about organizing qualitative data. Therefore, the data analysis techniques that will be discussed in this block will be suggestive rather than prescriptive. Familiarizing oneself with the data. This is the most crucial aspect of data analysis process. Very often, due to our unfamiliarity with the data, we tend to drift along the way and get confused. Therefore, it is necessary for the researcher to read, reread, and once more read through the data. This intense and often tedious process enables you to become familiar with what you have learned in intimate ways. There is no substitute for transcribing. It familiarizes you with the data, provides leads for further data gathering, provokes insight, and stimulates analytical thinking. Furthermore, not all people are good visual learners or oral learners. So, transcribing is not a mere technical exercise, it caters to both types of persons. Thus, this task requires extraordinary discipline on the part of the researcher. 4.2 Objectives. After going through this unit, you will be able to define qualitative research, discuss needs and relevance of qualitative research in education. Explain main features of different types of qualitative inquiry viz. Biography, phenomenology, grounded theory approach, ethnography and case study. Describe basic procedural details of such methods. Design qualitative research in the context of any educational problem. Discuss the complexities involved in the analysis of qualitative data. Identify and discern quantitative and qualitative data. Describe the variety of sources through which qualitative data can be collected. List the qualitative data analysis strategies. Explain the uniqueness of different data analysis strategies, and analyze data using qualitative techniques. Identify the basic requirements of qualitative data analysis techniques. Discuss the different qualitative data analysis techniques such as codification, categorization and classification, content analysis, and triangulation procedure. Describe the procedure involved in different qualitative data analysis techniques. Differentiate amongst various qualitative data analysis techniques. Appreciate that qualitative data analysis requires intellectual rigor and creativity. And use qualitative data analysis techniques in your research work. 4.3 Definition of qualitative research. As you know, the emergence of qualitative methods of research is of recent origin. Social scientists, anthropologists, and sociologists have given a shape to the concept of qualitative research mostly during the end of 20th century. The procedural clarity is still in the process of refinement. Clarity of the definitions of qualitative research is as follows. 1. In the initial stage of conceptual analysis of qualitative research, there was a trend of defining qualitative research as an opposite pole of scientific, quantitative inquiry. Quantitative research deals with a few variables and many cases, whereas qualitative research is carried out with a few cases and many variables, too. The above definition focuses on the scope of qualitative methods of inquiry. However, from the point of view of methodological and process dimensions, the following two definitions may clarify your understanding of qualitative research. Creswell, 1998, defined qualitative research in a similar tone. To him, qualitative research is an inquiry process of understanding based on distinct methodological traditions of inquiry that explore a social or human problem. The researcher builds a complex holistic picture, analyzes words, reports detailed views of informants, and conducts the study in a natural setting. 3. Denson and Lincoln, 1994, say qualitative research is multi-method focus, involving an interpretive, naturalistic approach to its subject matter. Qualitative research involves the studied use and collection of a variety of empirical materials, case study, personal experience, introspection, life story, interview, observational, historical, interactional, and visual texts that describe routine and problematic and meaning in individuals' lives. You may trace at least 4 clear meanings from the above definitions. 1. Qualitative research focuses on the study of complex human and social problems in totality, unlike scientific method of concentrating on study of fragmented variables or situations or events. 2. Qualitative research places the main emphasis on the researcher who narrates and interprets phenomena in terms of meanings derived from people's experiences, events, etc. Hence, human and subjective approach is highlighted. 3. The studies are conducted in a natural setting, i.e., to observe the events without making any manipulations or controls on variables studied. 4. It involves a variety of data gathering techniques and approaches of qualitative nature, viz., case study, interviews, dialogues, observations, personal experience, life story, visual data like photography, etc. These data are gathered from varieties of sources. 4.4 Characteristics of qualitative research. The following are the characteristics of qualitative research. Multiple realities. First, qualitative research assumes that there exist multiple realities in social and educational situations. These realities exist in concrete forms. They are perceived by people differently and thus become different mental constructs for different people. In other words, realities are taken to be what people perceive them to be at a particular point of time. Since social and educational situations keep on changing, from time to time, the realities too keep on changing. Furthermore, since the realities are context-specific, they cannot be tangible in a generalized form. 2. Meanings and interpretations. Qualitative research emphasizes on study of meanings given to or interpretations made about objects, events and processes concerning educational situations. 2. Them changes in terms of social and behavioral phenomena cannot be identified with the concept of physical movements which can be identified by external observation alone. Rather, the understanding of human behavior or a social phenomenon involves understanding of how men are what they are doing or participating in an activity. 3. Generation of knowledge. Qualitative inquiry insists on generation of knowledge resulting from the interaction between the inquirer and the respondents. The respondents answer the questions put by the inquirer in terms of their perception or meanings they attach to their actions. Moreover, interactions take place between the inquirer and his/her respondents to achieve maximum levels of responsiveness and insights concerning the problem under investigation. 4. Generalization. As stated above, the researchers do not believe in the process of generalization, as propounded by scientists. They argue that in the process of making a generalization, a lot of meaningful information existing in individual units is undermined, hence, Ginday's knowledge does not represent real knowledge. For them, the process of knowledge generation must take into account the differences or real evidences existing in different specific situations. Human relations. In the case of human relations, several intrinsic factors, events and processes keep on influencing each other constantly. Therefore, it is not possible to identify one-to-one cause and effect relationships at this level of naturalistic studies. The causality in social sciences cannot be demonstrated in the hard sense as it is done in the case of physical sciences. Rather, only patterns of plausible influences can be inferred from social and behavioral studies. 6. Value systems. Qualitative researchers do not believe in value-free inquiry. The influence of value systems is recognized in the identification of problems, selection of samples, use of tools, data collection, the conditions in which data are gathered, and the possible interaction that takes place between the inquirer and the respondents. 4.5 Reasons for conducting qualitative research. As a research student, you may be curious to explore in what circumstances one opts for qualitative methods of inquiry in comparison to quantitative methods of inquiry. Some of the situations which prompt a researcher to opt for the qualitative method are: as you know, there are different kinds of research questions about the phenomena under investigation, such as what happens, how does it take place, and why did it take place, or what are the causes of certain effects. The first two types of questions involving what, the present context, and status, and how, the process, are dealt with very well through qualitative methods. Unlike quantitative inquiry, where you may intend to explain causal relationships, why question, through comparison of groups or to establish associations between different variables, the qualitative method focuses on exploring the intricacies involved in process dimensions of an event in totality. For example, if you are interested in understanding the curricular practices of best quality universities, the qualitative method will suit you best. 2. Qualitative method is also preferred in the context of initial level of theoretical research. In social sciences, particularly in education, theories are not available to explain many completed events. The variables concerning the events are not easily identifiable. In such cases, the qualitative method is used to identify significant variables associated with the event. For instance, formal education practices taking place in a tribal setup with human and social development need to be tackled through qualitative methods since different variables involved in the situation need to be explored. Identification of different variables and trends lead towards refinement and theoretical explanation. 3. There are certain research problems which need holistic treatment. In other words, many variables need to be studied in depth in the context of one case or unit. For instance, designing a grassroots level plan for educational development of a village would require application of a qualitative method of inquiry where multifaceted data need to be gathered through various sources for intervention and development which treat the uniqueness of the concerned village. 4. Unlike experimental studies where a researcher intends to explain a cause and effect relationship in a controlled laboratory setting, the qualitative method is preferred to conduct the study without disturbing neutrality in setting. For instance, curricular practices of best quality schools need to be explored in natural settings through adopting qualitative methods like participant observations, visual documents, verification of project works, interviewing students, teachers, and parents, etc. One of the major limitations of quantitative inquiry is associated with the study of limited variables. Moreover, those variables need to be amenable to measurement. However, if your research problem is of such type where variables are not easily amenable to measurement and extensive data situations, you will have to opt for qualitative inquiry. 6. The nature of certain problems is such that your role as a researcher plays a vital subjective role than objective and impersonal role. For instance, the process of exploring meaning of certain behavioral exposures with its motives, your role is to be valued with a lot of significance since you will have to describe the event from the participant's point of view. Moreover, in such a process you can explore the reality, being a part of it as well as interacting with situations. You will have to depict the situations as an active learner and not by passing judgment as an expert. Such kind of studies demand application of qualitative methods in comparison to quantitative methods. 4.6 Types of qualitative methods. Many varieties of traditions of qualitative studies exist in social sciences. They have been categorized by Creswell, 1998, in the context of their forms, terminologies, and focus as under biographical study, phenomenological study, grounded theory study, ethnography, case study. 4.6.1 Biographical study. Main features. Biographical study is a study of an individual and his or her experiences as narrated to the researcher or found in different sources. You can come across biographical writings in different fields like literature, history, anthropology, sociology, education, psychology, etc. Biographies are presented with different perspectives like literary, historical, anthropological, sociological, educational, psychological, as well as of interdisciplinary nature. The focus of biography remains on telling and inscribing the stories of others. It explores history of life, e.g., accounts of major achievements of life. There are different connotations linked with biographical study with individual biographies, autobiography, life history, oral history. In all these cases, the researchers must take care of objectivity in expression with little research interpretation. It must be written in a scholarly way with a strong historical background of the subject and chronological organization. The account must be presented artistically from the perspective of presenting details in a lively and interesting manner. Steps of biographical studies. Different steps involved in writing biography are: the first step is to identify the experiences in an individual's life to be arranged chronologically in different stages of life. 2. The researcher gathers concrete contextual materials through interviews. He gathers stories. 3. The stories are organized around different themes. The themes indicate major events of individual's life. 4. The researcher explores the meaning of these stories. He also looks for larger structures to explain cultural issues, etc. 4.6.2 Phenomenological study. Main features. Phenomenological studies focus remains on describing the meaning of life experiences for several individuals about a concept or the phenomenon. It is said that through phenomenological approach the researcher explores the structures of consciousness in human experiences. Here, experiences contain both the outward appearance and inward consciousness based on memory, image, and meaning. Steps of phenomenological studies. The procedural details of phenomenological studies are listed as under. At first, the researcher must recognize his or her own preconceived ideas about the phenomena to understand it through the voices of several experienced persons. 2. Second, he writes research questions that explore the meaning of that experience for individuals. 3. Third, the researcher collects data from individuals who have experienced the phenomenon under investigation. Usually the data are gathered through long interviews of 5 to 25 experienced persons. I-4 data are analyzed in the form of statements and units. Then the units are transformed into clusters of meanings. Finally, such analysis is linked with general description of experiences incorporating what was experienced and how it was I experienced. 4.6.3 Grounded theory study. Main features. This kind of study aims at discovering or generating a theory. Here theory means an abstract analytical scheme of phenomenon. In other words, a theory is understood as a plausible relationship as any concept or sets of concepts. In this case, theory is discovered in the context of a particular situation. This situation is one in which individuals interact, take actions, or engage in a process in response to a phenomenon. The researcher intends to explore how people act and react to a phenomenon. The process involved in data collection can be through continuous visits to the field, interviews with participants, in-depth observations of activities, etc. The researcher develops and interrelates categories of information and writes theoretical propositions or hypotheses through the grounded theory method. A theory is generated in the context of a phenomenon being studied. Hence, the researcher goes beyond one step ahead of understanding the complexities of processes involved in a situation. He tries to help others to comprehend such complexities with the help of a theoretical framework developed by him. Such a theory is evolved towards the end of the study. As stated, different types of studies in above. The theoretical framework may be depicted in the form of a narrative statement, educational research, a series of hypotheses or propositions, or in the form of a visual picture. For example, the researcher studies the complexities involved in the teaching-learning processes where the sole responsibilities of such processes are shared by learners under the guidance of a teacher. The researcher would like to build a theory in this context through application of the grounded theory method and shares different steps involved in this method. Steps of grounded theory study. In the context of a particular situation, the researcher makes several visits to the field, makes in-depth observations, and conducts interviews. The data collection process continues till the researcher comprehends the totality in a situation. However, the major focus remains on in-depth interviews. 2. With the help of data available, the researcher makes categories of information. A unit of information composed of events, happenings, and instances is presented in the form of one category. 3. Often it happens that during the data collection process the researcher analyzes the data and gradually categories are formed on specific instances or happenings. Hence the data collection process and data analysis are integrated on many occasions. 4. After data analysis, the researcher may like to be back to the field to gather more information, analyze the data, and so forth. Hence, this zigzag process continues till a saturated state is identified for arriving at a theoretical framework. Towards the end of the study, the researcher presents an elaborate theoretical framework to understand the complexity of an event. 4.6.4 Ethnography. Main features. Ethnography can be understood as a description and interpretation of a cultural or social group or system. Here the focus of the study remains on examining the patterns of behavior of a group, its customs and ways of life. This method involves prolonged observation of events where the researcher becomes a part and parcel of the day-to-day lives of the people. One-to-one interviews with the members of group, corroborated with participant observation, can form the base of such a method. The researcher makes use of ethnography to study the meanings of behavior, language, and interactions of the culture-sharing group. For instance, educational processes of particular tribe or a rural village can be studied applying ethnography, where cultural and behavioral interactions involved in education processes can be studied in totality. As an outcome, the researcher comes out with a report almost in a book form. 4.6.5 Case Study. Main features. 1. Case study as a method of research focuses on in-depth study of a unit or case in totality. The case may be an individual, program, an event, an institution, an activity, etc. The case study method was originally used in medicine to examine the patient's previous development, his health and physical state from the beginning, and many other factors in the past. Besides making a careful study of the patient's present condition and symptoms, Freud used the case study method to assist his subjects in solving their personality problems. The published detailed accounts of his interviews with patients and his interpretations of their thoughts, dreams, and actions provide excellent examples of case studies. The investigation of a case is of exploratory nature. It involves detailed, in-depth data collection employing multiple sources of information concerning all pertinent aspects of a case. It is also interpreted that a case may be a unique and bounded system. This means the case under investigation is bound by time and place. The uniqueness of a case refers to the typical characteristics of a case, such as a quality institution or an ashram school, a particular program or course of study, or university or an innovation, etc. The researcher tries to explore in detail about what events occur and how they occur. Multiple sources include observations, interviews, audiovisual materials, documents, records, etc. A case is to be studied in a given context, i.e., study of a case is conducted within its setting. The setting may be a physical setting, social, historical, or economic setting, etc. As a whole, the case study helps a researcher to understand the complexities of an event or events with contextuality and develops insight about with the nature and process, dimensions of the event studied. In the Indian context, such a method has been used in the case of doctoral and research projects like a study of distance education in an Indian university. This study's focus is an identification and description of different underlying factors contributing towards success of distance education program of all university as a whole. 3. A case study of management processes of National Adult Education Program in Orissa. This study aims at description of the management processes interlinked with national level, state level, district level, project level and village level adult education programs in terms of the different dimensions of management like policy making, planning, communication, staffing, direction, coordination, budgeting and evaluation. Besides these kind of case studies, we have come across some other studies like a case study of school products in Delhi, a study of school involvement in a village of Nagaland, case studies of innovative institutions at secondary level in Tamil Nadu, management of medical colleges, a case study. From the above, you can see that the case study method in educational research may focus either on the study of an educational program or on a set of processes of an institution in the context of development of learning skills, language competencies, reading, comprehension of students. Guidance counselors or social workers conduct case studies for diagnosing a particular condition or problem and recommending therapeutic measures. They gather data from a particular individual and confine their interest to the individual as a unique personality. Steps of case study. Case study is conducted by adopting the following steps. First, the researcher identifies the uniqueness of the case to be studied or a number of cases to be studied. Whether a normal case is to be studied or an unusual and typical case is to be studied is decided at this stage. 2. Keeping in view different contexts and perspectives of the problem, the researcher delimits what is to be studied within the scope of investigation. 3. Once the dimensions of a unit are identified for investigation, the researcher locates different mechanisms of gathering different varieties of evidences from different sources. After identification of the case and content, the present status of the case is determined through direct observation or record. Here, the researcher goes far beyond casual observation or superficial description. For example, to make a case study of a delinquent child, the first thing the researcher has to do is to survey the present status of the child by making an assessment of his physique, cognitive and non-cognitive factors. The mechanisms to be chosen may be observation, interviews, document, surveys, audiovisual recordings, projective and non-projective tests, etc. The observation can be participant in nature as employed in ethnography. It can be direct observations. Data may be gathered through various sources, like gathering evidences from participants, functionaries, and stakeholders of a program, institutional records and documents, observation of events taking place, etc. 4. Data gathered through multiple sources are subject to qualitative analysis. It can be a holistic analysis of the entire case or analysis of a specific aspect of a case. Data analysis involves descriptive procedures. The themes or issues are identified. Interpretations are made about the case in its given contexts. It also involves narration of events chronologically and giving an account of events in totality. The detailed perspectives of significant events concerning a case are highlighted through such narrations. 6. In case of study of number of cases, the analysis is done into phases. First is analysis of data concerning the themes of each case separately. Within case analysis, which follows the first, is doing a thematic analysis across the case. This is called cross-case analysis. 7. In the final step, the researcher reports about the experiences and findings of the case. For example, in a study, first the researcher gathers evidence through participant observations and interviews. He notices certain trends and puts them into different cluster themes. Then he tries to place these themes in different groups and makes more abstract categories at the last stage of inquiry. Hence, with the help of an inductive approach, the researcher's initial level ideas and questions are refined in due course of investigation. A summative view of different qualitative methods. Different research methods have their uniqueness with regard to the focus of studies. As stated above, biography is used to explore the life of an individual, whereas phenomenological inquiry is used to understand the essence of experiences of persons about a phenomena. Grounded theory approach is adopted to develop a theory grounded in data from the field. Ethnography aims at describing and interpreting a cultural and social group. Case study is used to develop an in-depth analysis of a single case or multiple cases. However, all these methods adopt qualitative techniques of data collection such as interviews, observation, study of documents, relevant records, etc., and incorporate descriptive and narrative approaches of data analysis. 4.7 Context of qualitative methods. All the kinds of qualitative methods have a common framework of ontological, epistemological, axiological, rhetorical, and methodological perspectives. From the point of view of assumptions regarding nature of reality, the qualitative inquiry values subjective and multiple social realities. It presumes that reality cannot not have existence being separated from the perceiver. One researcher. Rather, reality is constructed by individuals involved in research situations, unlike assumptions of single reality as emphasized by scientific inquiry. The concept of multiple realities is emphasized in the qualitative paradigm of the researcher. Through qualitative inquiry, multiple realities are narrated by representing diverse perspectives on the phenomenon. Hence, diversified, constructed realities are the focus of qualitative model of inquiry. 2. In qualitative methods, the role of researcher is visualized as inseparable from the problem under study. The qualitative researcher interacts with the situation he/she studies. The researcher becomes a part and parcel of situation studied. He almost tries to find the meaning by being very close to the reality. Hence, the gap between observer and observed is minimized. he shifts his status from objective and external observer to insider. 3. From an axiological point of view, qualitative research emphasizes on value-loaded inquiry. Since the researcher is the sole instrument of investigation, it is natural that his values and biases influence the process of inquiry. Hence, field studies conducted by qualitative researchers reflect their values and biases in presentation of data and interpretation. 4. The language of qualitative research is artistic and literary in nature. Unlike scientific reporting where an impersonal third-person presentation is emphasized, the qualitative studies are reported in informal style using the personal voice. Qualitative terms are presented in narrative form rather than presenting a definition along with its explanations instead of using the terms like internal validity, external validity, generalizability. The qualitative terms like credibility, transferability, dependability, and conformability are used in reporting of the studies. The qualitative research paradigm emphasizes an inductive logical approach. The researcher studies a given situation. He identifies categories from data gathered through interaction with the situation rather than confirming pre-decided categories through gathering evidences. 4.8 Common steps of conducting qualitative studies. The steps in conducting qualitative studies are I. Identifying problems and research questions. 2. Designing sources of data, sample and data gathering techniques. 3. Conducting field study or collecting data. And 4. Data analysis and reporting. I. Identifying problems and research questions. At the first stage, the researcher identifies a problem to be investigated. It emerges from a thorough analysis and review of literature and the experiences of the researcher and experts on several issues and problems. The major process of research, at this stage, is identified with building the central question of the study and subsequently linking it with a number of sub-questions. While identifying a central question, the researcher puts in open-ended and non-directional queries. The queries focus on the what and how aspects of the phenomena under investigation. The exploratory questions highlighting the process aspects or meaning aspects are considered as the main theme of the investigation. Following the central question, a small number of sub-questions are identified at the first stage of research. There can be a number of sub-questions, keeping in view the scope and focus of the study. For instance, in the context of a phenomenological study of understanding professional ethics of teachers, the researcher may ask sub-questions like 1. What does professional ethics mean to an experienced teacher? 2. What do the teachers do to upgrade professional ethics? 3. Describe one person with high professional ethics. These kind of questions become the guiding force for the next steps of research. 2. Design of the study. At this stage, the researcher develops an open sketch of sampling tools and techniques to be adopted, sources of data, etc. Unlike a scientific investigation where the design is built prior to conduct of the study, the qualitative researcher develops an open and flexible approach. At this stage of inquiry, the following considerations are kept in mind by the researcher. A. Sampling. Purposive sampling techniques are used for identification of informants' responses of the study. For instance, in the case of a phenomenological study, the researcher identifies all participants who experience the phenomena being studied. Moreover, the researcher examines the individuals who can contribute significantly to develop a theory in the context of a grounded theory. In the case of a case study, the researcher likes to gather evidence from diverse situations which display multiple facets of the case. Hence, he picks up a heterogeneous group of respondents who are stakeholders of the system. As a whole, it can be said that keeping in view the nature of questions involved in the study, the researcher identifies the appropriate sample. The sample size may vary from problem to problem. B. Forms of data. The researcher must be clear about what kinds of data are to be gathered for investigation. Mainly, they can be categorized under the following four heads. 1. Evidences about the surroundings, situations, activities, events and performances, etc. through observations. 2. Evidences or experiences as explored through interviews. 3. Evidences on developments, performances, demography, rate of participating, nature of progress recorded or noticed in various kinds of documents, publications, write-ups, etc. And 4. Physical trace of evidence, behavioral dynamics, expression, feelings, emotional outbursts, etc. to be trapped by audiovisual data gathering devices. The investigator must keep an open mind while employing various data gathering devices, keeping in view the nature of data that emerge during the data collection process. Field work. 3. Data collection process. As stated earlier, mainly 4 kinds of data gathering devices are adopted by qualitative researchers: viz., observation, interviews, document analysis, and audiovisual gadgets. The researcher must be competent enough to deal with these different qualitative techniques of data collection. A. Interviewing. The researcher adopts informal interviews, keeping in view the sub-questions related to the issues and themes involved in the study. Identifying sample respondents to be interviewed purposefully is the first step. Whether a researcher goes for one-on-one interview or focus group interview is to be kept in mind. For smoothing the process of the interview, the researcher may make use of an interview protocol format with open-ended questions and ample space between the questions to write responses of the interviewer's comments. The researcher may opt for using audio cassette recorders or a telephonic device for interviews. B. Observing. The qualitative method mainly makes use of participant observation technique, where the researcher gets an opportunity to witness the events, being a complete insider. While ethnography insists on this kind of observation, in the case of study, the researcher may opt for direct observation. In employing the observation technique, the researcher must be careful about identifying the site to be observed, identifying who or what to observe, and how long. The observation protocol to be used, the role of the observer, i.e., participant or outsider, are to be thought about during the data collection stage. Moreover, the recording of observations, i.e., portraits of the informant, physical setting, particular events and activities, researchers' reactions must be kept in mind while adopting observation techniques. C. Documentation. While adopting this technique, the researcher must examine which materials are relevant to the study. He will also have to explore the means of how to trap evidences or having accessibility to relevant documents. As in case of historical studies, the researcher will have to be careful about authenticity of documents and the validity of information presentable therein. D. Visual devices. As a field worker, the qualitative researcher must be acquainted with using various kinds of audiovisual recording practices. While using them, he must be careful about the sensitivity of situations, ethical aspects, uniformity, etc. All these devices are used to gather evidences in natural setting with a view to studying the emerging total picture of the situation. 4. Analysis of data and reporting. Data collection and data analysis go on side by side in qualitative studies. Different techniques of data analysis include: A. Review of data and representing data by case, by subject, and by themes in the form of description, diagrams, tables and graphs. B. Initial codification and categorization and further minimizing categories. C. Frequent appearance of codes. Development of categories, development of analytical framework for theorization. In this approach, the researcher makes a thorough review of information, as noted in the observation formats or interview schedules, notes, etc. He points out key points and writes reflective notes on the basis of an initial review. Sometimes it motivates the researcher to verify certain points by making further interaction with the informants. The researcher translates the ideas of informants into metaphors. Furthermore, the researcher presents descriptions in the form of tables, graphs, pictures, figures, diagrams, etc. He represents the case by themes, or by specific subject areas. 2. The process of codification or categorization involves developing a short list of tentative codes that match a text segment. Elaborate lists of codes are arrived at in the initial stage. Then categorization of facts and themes takes place by identification of common codes. Furthermore, the categories are reduced to identify major themes and present them in narrative forms. 3. Another data analysis technique indicates preliminary counts of data and determines how frequently each code appears in the total data. Then the researcher identifies categories and develop analytical frameworks with a view to generating theories. In the whole data analysis procedure, a spiral approach is followed to identify categories, reflecting, cross questions, reading, interpreting, etc. 4.9 Verification of trustworthiness of qualitative research. Unlike standard procedures followed in establishing the objectivity and validity of quantitative research, you will come across many qualitative approaches to verify the trustworthiness of qualitative research. Generally, the following verification procedures are employed for studying trustworthiness of such kind of studies. I. Prolonged engagement and persistent observation. Researchers, prolonged interaction with informants and participatory observation wins the confidence of the informants. Hence, this procedure minimizes the possibility of vagueness of data. Prolonged engagement in the field helps the researcher to reflect on the genuineness and authenticity of data, on gathering relevant data, and on making purposeful use of evidences. 2. Rural explanations. Once the researcher, after qualitative analysis, has described the patterns and their explanations, it is important to look for rival or competing themes and explanations both inductively and logically. Inductively, it implies looking for other ways of organizing the data that might lead to different results. Logically, it involves searching for other logical possibilities and then finding if those possibilities can be supported by the data. However, while considering rival hypotheses and competing explanations, the strategy to be employed by the researcher is not attempting to disprove alternatives, but to look for data that support alternative explanations. In this strategy, the researcher should give due weightage to supporting evidence, look for the best fit between data and analysis. 3. Triangulation. It is another significant technique of verification where the researcher makes use of multiple and different sources, methods and theories in order to provide corroborating evidence. In other words, through triangulation, evidences are corroborated from different sources to throw light on a theme or perspective. It involves comparing and cross-checking consistency of data derived by different means at different times using qualitative methods. It means I. Comparing observational data with interview data. 2. Comparing observational data with questionnaire data. 3. What participants of a program say in public with what they say in private. 4. Checking for consistency the opinion of the participants about a program over a period of time, and comparing the opinion of the participants of a program with others who are associated with program in one capacity or the other. The triangulation of data sources within qualitative methods will seldom lead to a singly totally consistent picture. But such triangulation is helpful to study and understand when and why there are differences. 4. Peer review or debriefing. The methodology followed in the study with emphasis on subjective approach gets cross-examined by the peer researchers. The peers review the study, present their views in debriefing sessions. Such an operation helps the researcher introspect on the study in the context of peers' reflection on the procedural dimensions and reporting. Design checks. The nature of research design and methodology also contribute to distortion in results. Sampling gives rise to 3 types of errors. The errors may be due to I. Distortion in situations that were sampled for observation. 2. Distortion introduced by the time periods during which observations took place. 3. Distortion because of selectivity in the people who were sampled either for observation or interviews. Thus, the researcher must be careful to limit results of his study to those situations, time periods, people, and contents for which data are applicable. 6. Negative case analysis. Unlike quantitative study where the hypothesis is set prior to conduct of the study, the qualitative researcher keeps on refining the working hypotheses in due course of conducting the study. Hence, context specificity is kept in mind for refining the initial hypotheses till the completion of the data collection process and its analysis. The search for negative cases and instances that do not fit within the identified pattern, and their understanding is also competent in the verification and validation of results. 7. Clarifying researcher's bias. It is presumed that the researcher himself recognizes his bias and subjectivity. Hence, in view of making it transparent, the researcher comments on past experiences, prejudices, and orientations that influenced the interpretation and approach to study. 8. Member checks. Through this technique, the entire study's report with its prime database, analysis, and interpretations is presented before the participant respondents who can judge the accuracy and credibility of the account. They are asked to provide critical observations on the research work. 9. Rich and thick descriptive presentation. The researcher describes in detail the participants or setting under study. Hence, the readers get a clear picture of the setting. They get chance to examine the findings that can be applicable or transferred to other similar settings. Kiss smiley external audits. Through this process, the expert consultant who is purely external and independent to the study examines both the process and the product of the account, thus assessing its accuracy. The above indicators are employed to examine the authenticity and credibility of qualitative studies through involvement of human experiences in the process. What is more significant is that the researcher must maintain transparency throughout the study so that the scope of verifying its trustworthiness becomes wider and accessible. 4.10 Nature of qualitative data. As you know, there are two types of data: I. Quantitative and 2. Qualitative. In quantitative data, numerical values are assigned to the characteristics or properties of objects or events according to logically accepted rules. Whereas, in qualitative data, no such numerical values are assigned and the description or narration of events or situations are taken as they are. As you already know, quantitative data describe an empirical event or phenomenon in a numerical system with the help of different scales of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Nominal scales of measurement are used when a set of objects among two or more categories is to be differentiated on the basis of certain clearly known characteristics, such as gender, nationality, etc. The ordinal scales of measurement correspond to quantitative classification of a set of objects done with the help of ranking on a continuum. The interval scale of measurement is based on equal units of measurement. It includes how much or how little of a given characteristic or attribute is present. Ratio scale is the highest level of measurement. Since this scale assumes the existence of absolute zero, this type of measurement is almost non-existent in educational and psychological measurement. Qualitative data consists of detailed descriptions of situations, events, people, interactions, observed behaviors, still or moving images, and artifacts. These data are also available in the form of direct quotations from people about their attitudes, beliefs, and thoughts, excerpts or entire passages from documents, correspondence, records, and case histories. In addition to these, verbal data gathered through open-ended questionnaires, observations, and interviews are also mostly qualitative in nature. It may be noted that all these data are not usually immediately accessible for analysis, but require some processing. Raw field notes needs to be corrected, edited, typed, tape recordings need to be transcribed and corrected, video filming needs to be technically edited. and so on. 4.11 Sources of qualitative data collection. The main source of qualitative data collection is the field or research site. When a researcher enters the field, practically every aspect of the field provides scope for qualitative data collection. For example, the people and their interaction patterns, the social events, the cultural practices, the language and literature, the art and artifacts, the general ambiences of the research site, and the researcher's field notes and diary. Apart from these, the archival materials also form another major source of data collection. 4.1 To deciding data analysis strategies. Analysis of qualitative data is the process of systematically organizing the information collected from the field. In a study typically following qualitative approach, data analysis is a fixed stage one step and the data analysis techniques are more or less decided in advance. Whereas in a qualitative study, deciding about the data analysis strategies is very crucial and much depends upon the thinking and creativity of the researcher. There is typically not a precise point at which data collection ends and analysis begins. However, before taking any decision about qualitative data analysis strategies, the researcher makes a review of the following: the conceptual framework of the study; 2. The research questions raised in the study; 3. The strategy for research and design adopted. Thus, the above review sets the stage for deciding about qualitative data analysis strategies. The qualitative data analysis strategies are based on several decisions, which include ongoing analysis versus analysis at the end; 2. Structured or open-ended analysis; and 3. Analysis related to qualitative genre. 4.1 to 4.1 Ongoing analysis versus analysis at the end. In terms of when the researcher formally starts analyzing, there are basically two options available to him: ongoing analysis or analysis at the end of data gathering. In the ongoing analysis phase, the analysts formally reflect about the data, ask analytic questions, and write analytic notes throughout the study. Those who analyze at the end wait until all or most of data are gathered and then begin the task of asking analytic questions. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. More experienced field workers tend to analyze as they go. The beginners try to do some analysis as the study unfolds because it makes the final analysis easier and less daunting. However, in either case, Rossman and Rallis, 1998, have suggested the following points which may be kept in view by a researcher. Keep your questions in mind. Remember what you are trying to learn about. Modify your data gathering based on what you are learning, not chance. Ask analytic questions as you go along. Write all the time. Note hunches, thoughts, impressions. Write analytic notes. Talk your ideas through with people. Read and read and read what others have said about the topic. Practice good management skill for keeping the data organized and accessible. Discipline yourself to log the day's activities, noting the date, what you did, names, times, and places. These points are invaluable suggestions which will facilitate ongoing analysis or analysis at the end. 4.1 to point to structured and open-ended analysis. Another decision to be made is how structured or open-ended is the analysis. In a structured strategy, analytic categories have been identified at the conceptualization and design phase. Open-ended analysis, in contrast, pose grand questions, are open to the unexpected, and let the analytic direction of the study emerge as it progresses. For example, suppose you are engaged in a study of school improvement program. In this study, the structured analytic categories would be as follows: school improvement program, structured analytic categories, impinging factors, internal context, adoption decision, cycle of transformations, outcomes. In the same example, if you have decided to use open-ended analysis strategies, the procedure would be as follows: School Improvement Program, impinging factors. What are the assumptions or characteristics of this innovative program? How far does the external context, the community or district education office, act as an impinging factor? Internal context. What is the prior history of innovations in this school? To what extent do the demographic factors affect the school innovation program? What are the organizational rules, norms, work arrangements, practices within the class and the school at large? Adoption decision. Do the school authorities have concurrence regarding the decisions to be adopted? What are the support systems made available for implementation? Cycle of transformations. How frequently does the school plan for improvement? Outcomes. To what extent is the school improvement program institutionalized? What are the perceived gains and losses, individual and institutional? What are the side effects, positive, negative, anticipated and unanticipated, depending upon the responses to the above categories? Further categories and themes will emerge. Forecasting or closely stipulating analytic categories does not occur with open-ended studies. In practice, studies fall somewhere along a continuum, as with the assumptions you make about social science and society. Most studies are more or less either open-ended or structured. Few are all one way or the other. 4.1 to 4.3 Analysis related to qualitative genre. Analysis is also shaped by the genre framing your study. For example, phenomenological studies are open-ended, searching for themes of meaning in participants' lives. Broad categories are sought, with sub-themes to elaborate the topography of meaning. A feminist phenomenological study would search for the deep meaning of women's experiences. What are women's experiences of patriarchy? What role does oppression play in their lives, specific instances of discrimination, and so on? Ethnographic studies usually begin with broad domains for gathering data that then shape analysis. They are balanced between structure and openness. Case studies are uniquely intended to capture the complexity of a particular event, program, individual, or place. They focus holistically on the organization or individual. Analysis, then, proceeds logically and systematically from decisions made earlier on. It does not begin at some point in the study. Decisions made about the specific strategy, assumptions about knowledge and truth, and the genre most congruent with these decisions. All forecast analysis. Whether you analyze as you go on or hold off until the end of a study, whether you have stipulated analytic categories at the conceptualization stage or let them emerge, whatever the qualitative genre, framing the study, the process of analysis are similar. 4.13 Components of qualitative data analysis. Once the data analysis strategy is decided, the next task to be done involves three concurrent flows of activity: data reduction, data display, and drawing conclusion and verification. Miles Huberman, 1994. It may be mentioned here that these three activities are by no means exclusive and that they form a part of data analysis strategies. Brief explanations of those activities are as follows. 4.13.1 Data reduction. It refers to the process of selecting, focusing, simplifying, abstracting, and transforming the data that appear in written-up field notes or transcriptions. Data reduction is not something separate from analysis. It is a part of analysis. Data reduction is a form of analysis that sharpens, sorts, focuses, discards, and organizes data in such a way that meaningful conclusions can be drawn and verified. 4.13.2 Data display. The second major flow of analysis activity is data display. Generally, a display is an organized, compressed assembly of information that permits conclusion drawing and action. Looking at display helps us to understand what is happening and to do something, either analyze further or take action based on that understanding. As with data reduction, the creation and use of displays is not separate from analysis, it is a part of analysis. Designing a display. Deciding on the rows and columns of a matrix for qualitative data and deciding which data, in which form, should be entered in the cells are analytic activities. 4.13.3 Drawing and verifying conclusion. The third stream of analysis activity is conclusion drawing and verification. From the start of data collection, the researcher in the field makes notes about the activities and their explanations. Subsequent 1y, these notes reveal some possible configurations, from where tentative conclusions are draw 11 and they are verified and cross-checked, while in the field, to check about the credibility of those conclusions, given below is an example to illustrate how the above three activities have been done. Note, the example given below is only one interaction pattern pertaining to the event which has been presented. Field note, date, 24th June 2022 time, 8 a.m. Place, Thomal Rampur. Event, a school dropout working as a laborer in a construction site. Rohit is a school dropout of 7th standard. I met him early.er in his house and wanted to talk to him, but he was shy and refused to talk. I then decided to observe him, how he utilizes his time, and in the process find out the reasons of his dropping out. It is a construction site. One individual, who I don't know, is giving directions to a group of people, Rohit included, to attend to some task. In the meantime, he calls Rohit, gives him some money and sends him to fetch tea for him from a nearby tea stall. On his return, he stares at him. Why I don't know, scolds him and sends him to the same tea stall again, and after some time Rohit returns, speaks something to him and goes back to the work he was doing. On my enquiring, the gentleman explained that Rohit had committed some error in calculating and as a result, he had scolded him. Also, he expressed surprise that despite having studied up to STD 7, Rohit did not know even simple calculation. Meanwhile, I had some other discussion with him, though it was not on my agenda, and by then he ordered all people working at the site for a lunch break. It was about 12:00 noon when I left the place. The field note presented above contains a wide variety of information pertaining to my task. For the purpose of my analysis, I may not need them all. So through the process of data reduction, the following text has been arrived at. Date, 24th June 2022 time, 8 a.m. Place, Thomal Rampur. Event, a school dropout working as a laborer in a construction site. Rohit is a school dropout of STD 7. When questioned by the investigator, he refused to divulge the reasons for his dropping out. Consequently, the investigator wanted to observe him to know how he utilizes his time. Rohit was engaged as a laborer in a construction site. One day he got a scolding from the owner, perhaps for committing a calculation mistake. The owner's perception was that a VI standard student was not supposed to commit errors in simple calculation. What is meant by simple calculation? No clarity exists. If the above transcribed field note is presented in the form of data display, then the text appears somewhat like this. Date, 24th June 2022 time, 8 a.m. Place, Thomal Rampur. Event, a school dropout working as laborer in a construction site. Name of the individual Rohit, dropout at which class VI, current engagement laborer at a construction site. Other than as a laborer, what was fetching tea from the tea stall, the work he was engaged in due to which he got a scolding. Why was he get the scolding? Error in calculating. Why was he at fault? No information. What was the perception of the VI standard educans are not owner supposed to commit mistakes in simple calculation. What is simple calculation? No clarity. Did the owner verify whose fault? No information. It was. What did Rohit have to say? No information. Thus, the data display presented above reveals some tentative conclusions that Rohit is a school dropout of VI standard engaged as a laborer in a construction site. One day, due to an error in calculation, he was ridiculed by the owner. In the absence of adequate information, it is very difficult to say whether he knows calculation or not and whether it is because of this lack of mathematical knowledge that he left the school. Such tentative conclusions help the investigator to probe further till all the unanswered questions are answered in order to arrive at a final conclusion about one aspect of Rohit's dropout behavior. 4.14 Data Analysis Techniques in Qualitative Research. A wide variety of data analysis techniques are used in qualitative research. Familiarity about all those techniques would be highly desirable on the part of every researcher, but for a beginner it would be pertinent to know about a few techniques which are most commonly used. Some of those techniques are presented below. 4.15 Codification. Coding is the formal representation of analytical thinking. Codes are tags or labels for assigning units of meaning to the descriptive or inferential information compiled during a study. Codes are usually assigned in the form of an alphabet or alphabets, words, phrases or sentences. Use of symbols and numbers are generally avoided because data retrieval becomes very difficult and the analyst finds it cumbersome to be able to get back to the concept as quickly as possible. Example, in a program evaluation research, suppose you are coding an interview data, then coding will appear somewhat like the following: code and meaning, prog program, org organization, ob observation, obs observations, p participants, ps participant, s staff, prog. Ideology program, ideology, prog. Process examples of program process, group prog. Group process. Sub-G subgroup formations. Using the above codes, the whole set of interview data can be codified. 4.15.1 Types of codes in the literature on qualitative research. For qualitative data analysis, especially for coding, a variety of types of codes exist, but for a beginner the following two are suggestive, descriptive codes, and pattern codes. Descriptive codes, they entail little interpretation. Rather, you are attributing a class of phenomena to a segment of text. For example, in a study on school innovation, you might use the following codes: MOT for motivation, and suppose you want to distinguish between teachers' motivation from administrators. You can use the following code: TRMOT for teachers' motivation and ADM MOT for administrators' motivation. F4 However, in course of field work, you gain some more knowledge about the local people and their involvement in the school innovation program. You may then use the following codes: PLJB MOT for public motivation and PRIV MOT for private motivation. Pattern codes. Pattern codes are inferential or explanatory that identify an emergent theme or explanation. They pull together a lot of material into meaningful and parsimonious units of analysis. A coded segment of field notes illustrates an emergent leitmotif or pattern that you have discerned in the field. The codes can be assigned. For example, IM 1 leitmotiv, Patta pattern, eth theme, compt commitment, comma ATT attitude, GI causal link, and so on for a pattern you have inferred during your field work on school innovation program. In this case, the discerned pattern would be about the teacher's commitment and attitude towards the school innovation program. When to code, this is important. Same analysts reserve coding for the end of data collection. This is not desirable because late coding enfeebles analysis. Coding is not just something you do to get the data ready for analysis, but it is something that drives ongoing data collection. 4.15 Some do's and don'ts about codes. Miles and Huberman, 1994, has suggested the following do's and don'ts in the form of advice. Code are efficient data labeling and data retrieval devices. They empower and speed up analysis. Creating a start list of codes prior to field work is helpful. Do not wait too long or move capriciously from one coding scheme to another. Make sure all of the codes fit into a structure. Do not add, remove, or Reconfigure codes. Keep the codes as semantically close lo the terms they represent. Do not use numbers as codes. Define codes operationally. Remember, codes are category labels, but they are not a filling system. Every research needs a systematic way to store coded field data and a way to retrieve them easily during analysis. 4.16 Categorization and classification. The literature on qualitative research does not distinguish between the concepts, categorization and classification, rather, they are used interchangeably. However, for the purpose here, let us understand them separately so that we will be able to appreciate why they are inseparable concepts, insofar as qualitative data analysis is concerned. It may be pertinent to note here that both categorization and classification are processes, and the analyst uses them simultaneously for qualitative data analysis. Eventually, this will become clear as you read through this section. 4.16.1 Categorization. It is a process of identifying patterns in the data. Recurring ideas, themes, perspectives, and descriptions that depict the social world you are studying. As you read through field notes or listen to interview rapes, your task is to identify salient themes, recurring ideas, and patterns of belief that help you respond to your research questions. This is an intellectually cha-1 lelgi 11.g phase or data analysis. To some extent, it is an art and is creative as well. Pattern 1990 describes inductive analysis as a strategy to identify salient categories or themes. Inductive analysis means that the patterns, themes, and categories of analysis come from the data. They emerge out of the data rather than being imposed on them prior to data collection. In the inductive analysis, data can be categorized using typologies, indigenous typologies, and analyst-constructed typologies. Each of these typologies is described below. Indigenous typologies. Typologies are classification systems made up of categories that divide some aspects of the world into parts. Indigenous typologies, classification schemes, are expressed by participants and are generated through their analysis of how they use language and what they express. This approach requires an analysis of the verbal categories used by participants in a project in order to break up the complexity of reality into parts. It is a fundamental purpose of language to tell us what is important by giving it a name and, therefore, separating it from other things with other names. Once these labels have been identified from an analysis of what people in the program have said, the next step is to identify the attributes or characteristics that distinguish one thing from the other. The purpose of this analysis is to discern and report how people construe their world of experience from the way they talk about it. Example, let us suppose that you are engaged in a project on reducing dropout rate among tribal school children. While collecting the data from one of the targeted schools, you realize that teachers can provide more valuable information. You then directed your observation and focused interviews on them and learnt that teachers had a peculiar way of categorizing students. It then became necessary for you to understand the ways in which teachers categorized students. With regard to the problem of disobedience, absenteeism, tardiness, and skipping classes, the teachers had come to label students as either chronics or borderlines. One teacher described the chronics as the ones who do not obey teachers at all and remain frequently absent in the class. Another teacher said tribal children are like that. Everything you do to get them does not work. Another teacher said tribal children do not understand our language and there always remains a communication gap. Thus, to avoid unpleasant situations, they show all these behaviors. You can always pick them out. The chronics, the borderlines, on the other hand, skip a few classes, remain absent only on certain times of the academic year. Another teacher said they are disobedient and get influenced by the chronics. Another teacher said borderlines are those who are erratic in their attendance in the class. In the above example, you will observe that all teachers used only two categories to label the students, but their definitions differed. As an analyst, you have to portray and understand the teacher's views about dropouts as represented by this indigenous typology. This is possible only when you know what are the educational inputs provided in the school is, how these are implemented, and what are the roles of the teachers in this endeavor. Such efforts will pave the way for a clear understanding about this indigenous typology of chronics and borderlines used by the teachers, and it will have important implications for the research project. Thus, these categories then become the themes which will be important throughout the data analysis and the final report. Analyst constructed typologies. These typologies are created by the researcher and do not necessarily correspond directly to the categories of meaning used by the participants. This process entails describing patterns, themes, and categories that you see in the data and may well be subject to the legitimate charge of imposing a world of meaning on the participants that better reflects the observer's world than the world under study. Pattern 1990. Through logical reasoning, you may identify ways of conceptualizing data that then generate new insights or typologies for further exploration. Example. Let us take the example used in the case of indigenous typology to have a fuller understanding about analyst constructed typology. From the example, as an analyst, you can identify 4 different categories of dropouts. Many more and different categories are possible. They are the truants. These are the students who do not obey the teachers and remain frequently absent in the class. The submissives. These are the students who develop complexity due to a communication gap and are non-responsive to any extent of cajoling by the teachers. Consequently, they turn out to be docile. The easy praise. These are the students who cannot decide what is good or bad for them, have no goal, and get carried away by the behaviors of truants. As a result, they become victims of the situation. The vulnerables. These are the students who are subjected to all kinds of victimization both by their peers and teachers. The typology presented above describes characteristics of dropouts. These typologies can later be used to make interpretations about the nature of the project. 4.16.2 Classification. Classification is a way of knowing. We have to be cognizant of the attributes of things to be able to group them. Tesh, 1990. In fact, in the early days, science was considered largely a way of developing classification systems. For some scholarly fields, classification is still a major objective. Botanical classification schemes and the periodic table of elements are well-known examples of classification schemes, while the periodic table is an example of a classification system that is so neat that the properties of elements not yet discovered could be deduced from the rules of the system. Not all things on Earth can be classified so neatly. In fact, as a rule, classification has its problems. For instance, to decide which objects fall into the class of chair, we need criteria by which to assess them. Usually, such criteria are called the properties of a category. The first property that comes to mind when I think of the class chair is that it is something to sit on. But it is not good enough, since I can sit on a bench as well, or a stool, a sofa, or even a log of wood. To rule out the log, I can decide that the next property is, it must have legs. Like this, I can go on deciding the properties, and even then the class chair would remain hazy, because for all the above mentioned properties different people, French, German, etc., would have special words for the same class. If classification becomes difficult in such a simple case, imagine classifying the vast amount of research data. Thus, on the one hand, it is obvious that classification is a helpful, probably essential tool. On the other hand, it seems artificial in many, perhaps most cases. The qualitative analyst, using classification as a tool for analysis, then looks for convergence in the data that have been categorized using typologies. Such an activity leads to a classification system of data. Guba, 1978, suggests several steps for converting field notes and interview transcripts into systematic categories for the purpose of analysis. The analyst begins by looking for recurring regularities in the data. These regularities represent patterns that can be sorted into categories. Categories should then be judged by two criteria: internal homogeneity and external heterogeneity. The first criterion concerns the extent to which the data that belong to a certain category hold together in a meaningful way. The second criterion concerns the extent to which differences among categories are bold and clear. The existence of a large number of unassignable or overlapping data items is good evidence of some basic fault in the category system. The analyst then works back and forth between the data and classification system to verify the meaningfulness and accuracy of the categories and the placement of data in categories. When several different classification systems have been developed, some priorities must be established to determine which category systems are more important than others. Prioritizing is done according to the salience, credibility, uniqueness, feasibility, and materiality of the classification schemes. Finally, the category system or class of 95 categories are tested for completeness. The completeness can be tested by examining the categories internally or externally. Internal examination means the individual categories should appear to be consistent. External examination means the class of categories should seem to comprise a whole picture. The steps and procedures suggested by Guba for categorizing and classifying the qualitative data are not mechanical and rigid. It involves both technical and creative dimensions. No infallible procedure exists for performing it. However, for the beginner, the following points are suggestive for doing classification of data. These have been presented in the form of basic requirements for classification. Identify, generate, and develop categories using any one typology or both. Judge the categories for internal homogeneity and external heterogeneity. Arrange or sort out the data as per the developed categories. There might be possibility of some data remaining out of the categories. Check, recheck and verify the meaningfulness and accuracy of the categories and the placement of data in categories. Prioritize the categories according to salience, credibility, and uniqueness of the classification schemes. Test the categories for completeness, both internal and external. Label the categories with some identification mark that will represent a class. Example. Let us take the same example used in categorization to understand classification system and at the same time to know how categorization and classification of data cannot be seen in isolation and separate from each other. Now, according to the first requirement, we have generated 6 categories: chronic and borderline through indigenous typology, and the truants, the submissives, the easy praise, and the vulnerables through analyst-constructed typology. According to the second requirement, the developed categories appear quite meaningful and at the same time distinct from one another. There is no ambiguity in understanding who are chronic or not and so on. According to the third requirement, let us suppose that we have sorted out the data into the identified categories. Even then, some data still remains to be put into categories and some questions still remain to be answered. In this case, you can see that those teachers who opine cronies are those who do not obey teachers at all and remain frequently absent in the class, find it difficult to label students who obey them but continuously remain absent in the class. Further, they are not sure whether such a description is gender-free or not. Thus, while sorting out the data into categories, many such data can be further refined and new categories can also be generated. According to the fourth requirement, the rechecking and verification of categories indicated that the categories are quite accurate and the placement of data into categories is quite appropriate. You can also verify the same on your own. According to the fifth requirement, when we prioritize the categories, the scheme may appear somewhat like the following. Note, P indicates priority. According to the sixth requirement, if you examine internally, you will notice that the categories are quite consistent in the sense that they have emerged from the two types of typology adopted by the investigator. From external examination, you will notice that the generated categories reveal one composite picture about the behavior of dropouts. Now, according to the last requirement, if you give identification marks as CD, chronic dropouts, and BD, borderline dropouts, you have automatically created two classes. 4.17 Content Analysis. Documentary data, textual data, records, interview transcripts, excerpts from people's speech, case histories, field notes or diary, biographies, and observation records have always been central to social science courses, but modes of analyzing them vary within the social sciences. For instance, in historical study, texts are analyzed with a combination of chemical analysis and textual analysis. In psychology, texts are analyzed with a combination of projective tests, clinical analysis, and more precise modes of assessing the content of the written document, and so on. However, amongst other types of textual analysis, content analysis is commonly used by researchers in the field of education. Content analysis is concerned with the classification, organization, and comparison of content of the document or communication. A central idea in content analysis is that the many words of the text are classified into much fewer content categories. Weber, 1985. While the recording units are sometimes larger than words, sentences, paragraphs, or themes, the basic procedure in content analysis is to design categories that are relevant to the research purpose and to sort all occurrences of relevant words or other recording units into these categories. For categorization, see the previous section of this unit. Then the frequency of occurrences in each category is counted and inferences are drawn. Another regularly used technique in content analysis is the taking of inventories of words in a document or transcription. Tesh, 1990. This is done by constructing exhaustive indices. Since the indices are then frequency ordered, usually with the most often used word at the top of the list, this strategy ends up also being numeric, as categorizing does. Inferences made from these inventories would also be similar to those drawn from the results of categorization. The only qualitative procedure in content analysis, i.e., the one in which numbers don't play any role at all, is the exploration of word usage, where researchers want to discover the range of meanings that a word can express in normal use. The method employed is the establishment of a keyword in context index. The target words are extracted with a specified amount of text immediately preceding and following them. Researchers can then group together those words in which the meaning is similar and establish how broadly or narrowly a certain term is construed by the author of the text, or they may compare word uses among groups of authors. 4.17.1 Approaches to content analysis. There are three approaches that a researcher may adopt in content analysis. They are I. Characteristics of content, 2. Procedures or causes of content, and 3. Audience or effects of content. In the first approach, the researcher is interested primarily in the characteristics of the content itself. She may focus either on the substantive nature of the content or upon the form of the content. For instance, if you are content analyzing a historical writing, you may concentrate upon the substantive aspect of the writing. Whereas, if you are content analyzing any archival material, you may concentrate both on the substantive dimension and form of the content. In the second approach, the researcher attempts to draw valid inferences about the nature of the procedures of the content or the causes of the symbolic material from the characteristics of the material itself. For instance, if you are content analyzing a video recorded situation, you may concentrate upon the procedures adopted by the participants to create the situation. In the third approach to content analysis, the researcher interprets the content so as to reveal something about the nature of its audience or its effects. She takes the content material as the basis for drawing inferences about the characteristics of the audience for whom the material, content, is designed or about the effects of communication which it brings about. For instance, if you are content analyzing an interview transcript of juvenile delinquents, you will be able to interpret from the data about the probable causes that has led the children to be juvenile delinquents. 4.17 to the procedure of qualitative content analysis. MER, 1983, has developed a procedure for qualitative content analysis, which includes a procedural model of text analysis and different techniques for applying it. The first is to define the material, to select the interviews or those parts which are relevant for answering the research question. The second step is to analyze the situation of data collection. How was the material generated? Who was involved? Who was present in the interview situation? Where do the documents to be analyzed come from? Etc. In the third step, the material is formally characterized. How was the material documented? How was it edited? Influence of the transcription on the texts, etc. In the fourth step, decision is taken about the direction of the analysis for the selected texts and what one actually wants to interpret out of them. This is followed by defining the analytical technique. The researcher defines which of the three techniques presented in the next section can be applied concretely. Finally, analytic units are defined. Here, MERing differentiates between the units in the following way. The loading unit defines what is the smallest element of material, which may be analyzed, the minimal part of the text which may fall under a category. The contextual unit defines what is the largest element in the text which may fall under a category. The analytic unit defines which passages are analyzed one after the other. In the last but one step, the actual analyses are conducted before their results are interpreted. Finally, 4.17.3 Techniques of Qualitative Content Analysis. The concrete methodological procedure basically includes three techniques, viz. Summarizing content analysis, explicative content analysis, and structuring content analysis. Summarizing content analysis. In this, the material is paraphrased, which means that the less relevant passages and paraphrases with the same meanings are skipped. First, reduction and similar paraphrases are bundled and summarized. Second, reduction. Example, an interview with a retired school teacher. I, investigator. RT, retired teacher. I, how are you, sir? RT, fine, thank you. I, what's your current preoccupation? RT, general reading in diverse areas. I, how do you plan to utilize your future time? RT, well, I plan to open a free coaching class for 11-1 standard students. I, you mean the type available found in the society? RT, no, not exactly like that. I do not have profit as a motive. I, how will you manage the expenses? RT, by nominal charge. I, can it not be attributed to profit motive? RT, no, not exactly, because I shall be charging exactly the amount of expenditure. I, when do you plan to start? RT, next June. I, is it the right time to start? RT, yes, precisely. I will get nearly a year's time to prepare students for the exam. I, thank you, sir, for your noble idea. RT, you're welcome. For the above interview transcript, if you are doing the summarizing the content analysis, then the text will appear somewhat like the following. A retired school teacher wishes to start a coaching class 11-1 at standard students. No profit motive, charging only the actual expenditure incurred by the teacher 1 to prepare students for 11-1 at standard board examination. First, reduction. If you paraphrase further. Second, reduction. Then the text will appear somewhat like the following. A retired school teacher is looking forward to starting a coaching class for Excite standard students as a voluntary effort one to prepare students for examination. Now, if you further paraphrase and make the final summary statement, then the text will appear like the following. A retired school teacher is looking forward to starting a coaching class on a voluntary basis for preparing students to appear for Excite standard examination. The explicative content analysis. It clarifies ambiguous or contradictory passages by involving context material in the analysis. Definitions taken from dictionaries or based on grammar are used or formulated. Example. Let us take the same example used in summarizing content analysis. In this 100 interview transcript, you will notice that the retired teacher is looking forward to starting a coaching class. Also, although he is going to charge the students, he says he does not have a profit motive. Now, if you want to find out how a coaching qualitative research class can be run without any profit motive, then collect the definitions pertaining to the two words tuition class and profit motive. Based on the meaning of these words, you will paraphrase the content like the retired teacher is intending to start a coaching class on no profit and no loss basis. The structuring content analysis. This analysis looks for types of formal structures in the material. Structuring is done on the formal aspects of the content by filtering out the internal structure. Further, the analyst looks for a single salient feature that describes more exactly the internal structure. Finally, the salient feature is interpreted in the light of the research questions of the analysis stated in the beginning. For doing such a type of content analysis, no general rule can be defined. It depends on the respective research question and the analytical power of the analyst. However, an attempt has been made in the following example to make you familiar about structuring content analysis. Example, let us take the same example used in summarizing content analysis. The research question stated for the analysis of the interview transcript was, what was the ulterior motive of the retired school teacher? From the analysis of interview transcript, you can filter out the internal structure like the following. The retired school teacher was contemplating to open a coaching class for Excite standard students on a no-profit and no-loss basis. The salient feature in the internal structure can be identified as the following. Coaching class on no-profit and no-loss basis. 4.18 Triangulation. Triangulation may be defined as the use of two or more methods of data collection in the study of some aspect of human behavior. It is a technique of research to which many subscribe in principle, but which only a minority use in practice. Denzin, 1978, has identified four basic types of triangulation. I. Data triangulation. The use of a variety of data sources in a study. 2. Investigator triangulation. The use of several different researchers. 3. Theory triangulation. The use of multiple perspectives to interpret a single set of data. And 4. Methodological triangulation. The use of multiple methods to study a single problem. The term triangulation is taken from level of surveying. Knowing a single landmark only locates you somewhere along a line in a direction from the landmark, whereas with two landmarks you can take bearings in two directions and locate yourself at their intersection. Fielding and Fielding, 1986. By analogy, triangular techniques in social sciences attempt to map out or explain more fully the richness and complexity of human behavior by studying it from more than one standpoint. The logic of triangulation is based on the premise that no single method ever adequately solves the problem of rival causal factors. Because each method reveals different aspects of empirical reality, multiple methods of observation must be employed. This is termed triangulation. I now offer as a final methodological rule the principle that multiple methods should be used in every investigation. Denzin, 1978. The presentation on triangulation so far reveals the vast scope of the use of this technique in educational research. it would have been ideal to have a discussion on the various types of triangulation techniques. But for the purpose here, let us focus our attention to triangulation as an analysis strategy. There are basically four kinds of triangulation that contribute to verification and validation of qualitative analysis. I. Checking out the consistency of findings generated by different data collection methods, that is, methods triangulation. 2. Checking out the consistency of different data sources within the same method, that is, triangulation of sources. 3. Using multiple analysts to review findings, that is, analyst triangulation. And 4. Using multiple perspectives to interpret the data, that is, theory perspective triangulation. By combining multiple observers, perspectives, methods, and data sources, researchers can hope to overcome the intrinsic bias that comes from single method, single observer, and single perspective studies. Denzin, 1970. 4.18.1 Triangulation of methods. Triangulation of methods will most often revolve around comparing data collected through some kind of qualitative methods with data collected through some kind of quantitative methods. This is seldom a straightforward process because it is likely that quantitative methods and qualitative methods will eventually answer different questions that do not easily come together to provide a single, well-integrated picture of the situation. Furthermore, it may be stated here that there is no magic in triangulation. The researcher using different methods to investigate the same problem should not expect that the findings generated by those different methods will automatically come together to produce some nicely integrated whole. Indeed, the evidence is that one ought to expect initial conflicts in findings from qualitative and quantitative data and expect those findings to be received with varying degrees of credibility. Given below is an example of multi-method approach to study the education of tribal women, conducted by Panigrahi et al. in 1987. Title: Education of Tribal Women, a Socio-Ecological Perspective. Objective: to explore the predominant factors operating in the tribal women's socio-ecological field with special reference to education. Methods: development of village profile, examination of school records, classification of economic and household activities, interview with parents and teachers, observation of tribal women's activities through field work. In the above study, the use of quantitative and qualitative methods give three sets of findings which are as follows. Between 1981-1986 there were only 21 girls out of a total list of 337 tribal students in the ashram school. No girls' enrollment was found in the same school after 1983. About 90% of the cultivable land was owned by people of other communities. Girls were engaged in a variety of activities like rearing children, cooking, cleaning the house, washing clothes, fetching water, and collecting firewood. Educational attainment of the tribal women was determined mainly by her economic and social conditions. The school curriculum, as such, does not have any direct bearing on their economic and social life. Children, especially girls, before 6 years of age are not considered fit to go to school, and after 10 years they are potential earners. Thus they have only 3 to 4 years left in between to go to school, that too if they wish, in spite of the lodging and boarding facilities provided by the government. In the ashram school, girl students do not enroll. There was a growing feeling among tribal people that educating their children will alienate them. When the above findings were triangulated, the researchers observed that it is the economic condition coupled with traditional lifestyles and social norms for women that define the position and role of women. Further, the passive acceptance by the Tiavanbialis of their age-old lifestyles seems to continue in a cyclic way. And finally, formal schooling and curriculum has hardly any relevance to the tribal women and her life. Neither does it provide the tribal women with any alternatives to improve herself economically or socially. In the end, it may be noted here that the above observations would not have been possible without the use of triangulation technique. 4.18.2 Triangulation of sources. The second type of triangulation involves triangulating data sources. This means comparing and cross-checking the consistency of information derived at different times by different means within qualitative methods. It means, as Patton, 1990, says, comparing observational data with interview data, comparing what people say in public with what they say in private, checking for the consistency of what people say about the same thing over time, and comparing the perspectives of people from different points of view. As with triangulation of methods, triangulation of data sources within qualitative methods will seldom lead to a single, totally consistent picture. Pattern 1990. It is best not to expect everything to turn out the same. The point is to study and understand when and why there are differences. The fact that observational data produce different results than interview data does not mean that either or both kinds of data are invalid, although that may be the case. More likely, it means that different kinds of data have captured different things, and so the analyst attempts to understand the reasons for the differences. Example, let us take the same study by Panigrahi et al. 1987. Only two instances of triangulated data sources are presented here. In this study, the different data sources were teachers, parents, community teachers, girl children, school records, educational officials, field notes. With regard to women's economic activities, when these different data sources were triangulated, the authors observed that their interview data revealed equal wages for men and women, and observation data revealed less wages for women. When this point was further explored, the researchers came to understand that, although legislation on equal remuneration exists, the presence of a number of exploitative forces makes it difficult for them to receive adequate wages, and it is more so for women, who are paid less than men. With regards to the education of women, the triangulated data sources indicated that the outlook regarding the education of girls was more conservative. While they endorse the view that a little bit of reading and writing is essential for every child, prolonged schooling is not necessary for the said purpose. Further, triangulation in this regard revealed that even if free lodging and boarding facilities are provided in the ashram schools, it is only the economically and educationally better off families that were sending their children to school. 4.18.3 Analyst triangulation. A third kind of triangulation is investigator or analyst triangulation, that is, using multiple as opposed to singular observers or analysts. Triangulating observers provides a check on bias in data collection. A related strategy is triangulating analysts, that is having two or more persons independently analyze the same qualitative data set and then compare their findings. Pattern 1990. Example, given below are a list of studies. Please refer to them for understanding analyst triangulation. Blees, D. and Cohen, L. 1990. Coping with computers, an ethnographic study in primary classrooms. Douglas, J. K. 1976. Investigative social research, individual and team field research. Patton, Michael. Quinn, 1986. Utilization-focused evaluation. Note, detailed references are provided at the end of this block. 4.18.4 Theory 1 Perspective triangulation. A fourth kind of triangulation involves using different theoretical perspectives to look at the same data. Observations of a group, community, or organization can be examined from a Marxian or Weberian perspective, a conflict or functionalist point of view. The point of theory triangulation is to understand how findings are affected 104 by different assumptions at fundamental premises. For example, if you are observing a social institution from a functionalist point of view, with regard to the concept in conflict, you tend to believe that it is a social construct and society develops qualitative research ways to control it, but from a conflict theorist point of view, you tend to believe conflict as an arena in which groups fight for power and the control of conflict. Means that one group is able, temporarily, to suppress its rivals. Take another example: existence of civil law in the society. A functionalist sees it as a way of increasing social integration, but a conflict theorist sees civil law as a way of defining and upholding a particular order that benefits some groups at the expense of others. Thus, from the above two examples, you will notice how perspectives bring drastic changes in the approach to a particular phenomenon. The discussion on triangulation so far has indicated that as an analysis strategy, it is quite robust and guards against all odds of investigators' bias. While it would be ideal to use all these types of triangulation analysis strategies, many a times it's neither desirable nor feasible. Thus, for a beginner, it would be appropriate to begin with the use of the first two types, viz. Method triangulation and data sources triangulation as analysis strategies. With experience and maturity, all the four types can be used as data analysis strategies. 4.19 In the foregoing sections, you were shown that main features of qualitative studies are needed mainly with the purpose of understanding process dynamics of a phenomenon in contextual frameworks. Such understanding may lead towards theorizations. Different kinds of qualitative methods are used in different contexts, such as biographies, ethnography, grounded theory, phenomenology, and case study. However, these methods follow common approaches like interviews, observation, study of documents, and narrative techniques of data analysis. These methods adopt subjective human and participant experience-based techniques in contrast to that of generic methods of inquiry. However, as a researcher, you will have to be mature enough to adopt various checks and balances for trustworthiness of findings of such studies. In this unit, we discussed the challenges faced by the social and behavioral science researcher in doing qualitative analysis of data, the necessity of skills, training, insights, and capabilities of the researcher in analyzing qualitative data, and the human factor, which is both a great strength and weakness of qualitative inquiry and analysis. Also, we have discussed the meaning and characteristics of qualitative data, the sources and the points to be kept in mind while deciding about qualitative analysis strategies. The main points of discussion in the entire unit are as follows. We have a few agreed on canons for qualitative data analysis. There are no absolute rules for qualitative analysis of data except to do the very best with one's full intellect and fairly represent the data. Qualitative analysis ultimately depends on the analytical intellect and style of the analyst. Data are mainly of two types: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative data describes an empirical event or phenomenon in a numerical system with the help of different scales of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Qualitative data consists of detailed descriptions of situations, events, people, interactions, and observed behaviors. The main source of qualitative data is the field or research site. Other than people and their socio-cultural interaction patterns, the art, literature, and artifacts too are the sources of qualitative data collection. In addition, archival material also serves as a source. Decision about qualitative data analysis strategies is dependent upon the conceptual framework of the study, the attendant research questions, and the strategy for research and design. There are three alternatives available for deciding qualitative data analysis strategies. They are: I. Ongoing analysis versus analysis at the end; 2. Structured or open-ended analysis; and 3. Analysis related to qualitative genre. The decision about data analysis is followed by three concurrent flows of activity, viz. Data reduction, data display, and drawing conclusion and verification. Data reduction is the process of selecting, focusing, simplifying, abstracting, and transforming the data that appear in the field notes. Data display is an organized, compressed, assembly of information that permits drawing of conclusion and action. Conclusion drawing and verification stems from data display which is verified and cross-checked while the researcher is in the field. In this unit we discussed the following. Analysis of qualitative data is best described as a progression, not a stage, an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Before the analyst attempts to analyze the data she has to do two activities with I. Organization of data and 2. Familiarizing oneself with the data. A wide variety of data analysis techniques are used in qualitative research, and the most commonly used techniques are I. Codification, 2. Categorization and classification, 3. Content analysis, and 4. Triangulation. Procedures. Coding is the formal representation of analytical thinking. Codes are tags or labels for assigning units of meaning to the descriptive or inferential information compiled during a study. Codes are two types: descriptive codes and pattern codes. Categorization is a process of identifying patterns in the data, recurring themes, perspectives, and descriptions that depict the social world. Inductive analysis is a strategy to identify salient categories or themes. In inductive analysis, data can be categorized using typologies. Indigenous typologies and analyst-constructed typologies. Classification is a way of knowing. We have to be cognizant of the document or communication. There are three approaches to content analysis with I. Characteristics of content, 2. Procedures or causes of content, and 3. Audience or effects of content. There are three techniques used in qualitative content analysis. They are I. Summarizing content analysis, 2. Explicative content analysis, and 3. Structuring content analysis. There are four kinds of triangulation procedure used in qualitative analysis of data. They are I. Methods triangulation, 2. Triangulation of sources, 3. Analyst triangulation, and 4. Theory perspective triangulation. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates. And we will see you with the next chapter.